Hi, everyone. My name is British Griffiths, and I'm a part of the SIFPAC support team. Welcome to day one of the 2025 Supplier Development Summit hosted by the Good Food Purchasing Initiative team. Together with our partners, we're working to make Chicagoland's food system more equitable and transparent, centered on food that's local, sustainable, fair, humane, and nutritious. That means shifting how institutions buy food through the Good Food Purchasing Program while also uplifting suppliers with resources and gatherings like this summit. Thank you for joining Wholesale Markets One-on-One, Scale Up Your Institutional Sales, featuring H. Nieto Friga. And I will hand it over to H to introduce themselves, and we will get started with today's presentation. Thank you all for joining us.
Thanks so much, British. Good to be here with all of you on this beautiful fall day. I'm coming to you from upstate New York, where it is getting really crispy out here. So I heard you all just had some final good weather in Chicago before it really turns. I think people are coming from all over though, but anyway, great to be here with you all. This is Wholesale Markets 101, considerations, buyer opportunities and challenges, and your readiness. So, on the docket for today, this training is really meant for growers who, and other producers too, but primarily growers who are experienced with direct marketing, so selling to CSAs, farmers markets, etc., and are curious about breaking more into the wholesale market. So we're going to go over understanding the different revenue streams that are available to you beyond farmers market and CSA sales. Understanding your readiness, we'll go into some pretty deep detail on what that means, and then we'll wrap up with understanding your farmer archetype. Last year, we did a training that went into some of this content, but a little bit more about specific sales scripts, understanding the sales funnel, and just sort of more advanced sales tactics and strategies. So if you want to check that out, there is a link to that on the SIFPAC YouTube channel in here. And at the end, we're going to provide a link to this deck so that you can click all the links that I'm going to show you inside of it. And then there's also a free resource packet at the end that you can download and use if it's helpful to you. So first, I'll tell you a little bit about where the organization that I'm representing, which is called Supply Change. We've been around for about 5 years, and our whole purpose is to make supply chains more inclusive and welcoming to small, mid-sized, and underserved producers. I'm from California, based in New York now, but we're operating in about 13 states right now, from Alaska to Maine to the south to the west. We have a team of 5 of us, all with experience as farmers, as nonprofit professionals, working in government. All of us have some aspect of working in the food system, and through that is the main thrust of our careers. And the primary thing that we're known for is creating sourcing pilots between primarily underserved producers and anywhere with a cafeteria. So that's schools, hospitals, universities, and corporate cafeterias. So we've done pilots for big tech companies like Google and PayPal and Broadcom and LinkedIn, for healthcare systems like Kaiser Permanente and public healthcare systems, for K through 12 schools, for big food service companies like Sodexo and Aramark. And then we also do advising and help out with policy research for governments, for nonprofits, for national organizations. And we also do a lot of trainings like these for producers and for producer advocates and allies. So that's a little bit about us. And then about me specifically, I've been with Supply Change since I founded it in the middle of 2020. Throughout my career, again, food systems has been my passion and what I've been committed to working on. I started off as a food justice and labor organizer, did a stint in local government, leading an urban ag program for the city of Austin in Texas. I've also just done some statewide farm to school work in California. And then I spent 6 years in the private sector as a buyer myself. I really wanted to understand what it's like to be the one hitting the order button. So I led dairy and dry goods teams at Blue Apron, the meal kit company, and then launched the grocery division at Imperfect Foods before I burned out from that life and decided to work for myself and put together all the different parts of the food system supply chain that I had seen and wanted to work on. So our expertise, and my expertise in particular, is about creating market opportunities for those who are locked out of the system. So primarily for underserved producers and for food hubs. And my personal passion is about understanding how these big machines work, infiltrating inside them and running a lot of experiments to see how we can make them more inclusive and fair. All right, so digging into the bulk of what we're going to cover today, we want to go over where we can sell our products beyond the farmers market, right, and beyond CSAs. So first, starting with small wholesale, a lot of this stuff is going to be familiar to you, but just want to give you a comprehensive overview. So when it comes to trying to branch out into restaurants, some of the opportunities here are that chefs are really interested in buying, that nice stuff, the specialty varieties that are going to make their customers remember their restaurant. They also tend to have pretty good pricing on offer because they charge their customers. They have higher margins that they can play with. They can often afford to pay you a little bit more too. There's often usually no middle management. You can deal directly with the chef, which has its pluses and minuses because chefs are very busy people. So a lot of that success is going to depend on your ability to build a relationship with him or her. And it can be really flexible with you and work with you if that relationship is strong, go up and down with the season and what you have to offer. Again, you can kind of see the potential trade-off there is that orders can be inconsistent. So it can be hard to rely on something week over week over week. It requires a lot of conversation and investment in that relationship building. And those orders can be small. So if you focus on restaurants and have a big stable of restaurants you sell to, that can help build out the volume that you're trying to sell, but it can be just a lot to manage. And so making sure that you have your delivery costs covered with all those drop-offs is really important. When it comes to retail grocers, it's easier to get in by far to a small and independent grocery store. It's really not possible to get into someplace like a Kroger or a Safeway or an Aldi because they are buying from giant distributors. But for a small independent retail grocery store or a co-op, that is a place that can be possible for you to sell to. And it allows you to get your product in front of a lot of different people, and the grocery store will do all the marketing for you once you can manage to get on the shelf. The issue is, of course, that with a small grocery store, they have a tiny little produce case. So it's helpful if you are interested in working with a grocery store like that, go in and look at the produce case and see how many feet long it is, right? So if it's a 10-foot long cold case, and you can see that there's only a little space for broccoli, a little space for onions, a little space for this or that, that is the opportunity and that's who you're competing with. So your product has to really stand out and your quality must be extremely high because the customers in a grocery store are shopping with their eyes. Another small wholesale buyer might be an early childhood education thing, like a small independent preschool. These are the types of buyers that want to buy the same thing from you over and over again because they want to offer the same thing to the kids every week. It also can help give you some experience with selling to larger buyers because you can get into a flow that looks similar to other types of institutions like a regular school district. The thing is that there's little kids, so they only eat a little bit, right? So those orders can be pretty small. They tend to like things like hand fruit, things that kids can easily eat. So we're not going to have much luck selling, like a collard green or something like that, or like a Hakurei radish because they're going to want something like an apple or a piece of fruit. Um, there's been some instances of some more unique things being sold in places like this, but it's really helpful to focus on things that little kids are going to want. There's also usually limited staff, so communication can be spotty and difficult to get in there. Moving on to special values aligned buyers. When it comes to food banks, I know we've all been devastated by the cuts to LFPA, which were enabling a lot of food bank sales. But even before LFPA, I've had a good amount of success working with food banks and getting them to purchase from small and underserved producers. The key here is the size of the food bank. So there's ultra large food banks that are serving hundreds of thousands of people with big trucks and big programs. It can be harder to get in there because they are highly dependent on corporations donating whole truckloads worth of food. They might want to buy, like an 8 pallet minimum of all one product, which is something I've dealt with before because they have to deliver the same thing to like 80 different places, right? So it is possible if you're working with somebody who could help you with that sale, but a better opportunity when you're starting off in a non-LSPA sales relationship with a food bank might be working with a small or mid-sized food bank. I've been able to help set up things like drop-off programs where, for instance, an egg producer I was working with in Northern California, and she wasn't able to sell all of her eggs, and we know that eggs expire very rapidly. So we basically set up a deal with her local food bank so that she could drop off all of her excess eggs that she wasn't able to sell in a given amount of time on a monthly basis. So she could just drop those off, get, and set, drop off an invoice and get paid regularly. So it helped manage her food waste and also helped her cash flow quite a bit. Food banks often have a whole list of products that they're getting donated from their corporate donors regularly. And that list of things they don't want to buy from anyone else. So things like cabbage, potatoes, onions, they typically are already having covered by donations. But what they often don't have and want are things that serve a diverse client base, right? So I have been asked by food banks, do you have any growers growing Black heritage produce or Asian specialty produce or South Asian specialty produce? Things that their clients want that corporate donors aren't providing. So it's helpful to ask if there are things like that that can be opportunities for you to sell to them. We went over some of the challenges with this already, that a lot of times they might have minimums if they're a larger food bank, and only certain products are allowed to be purchased. So that's a pretty decent overview of food banks there. Other opportunities with values aligned buyers might be box programs. We saw this a lot during COVID, and some of these programs still endure. But a lot of nonprofits that might put together a veggie box or a food box for low-income customers can be a really good opportunity because they often want to support local producers. Increasingly, we're finding some more and more opportunities for unique food as medicine type of programs and distributions for healthcare and clinics. Or there might be some special short-term type of program that a given philanthropic organization might be setting up. These can be, again, good starter sales for if you're just getting going with wholesale sales. The orders tend to be small but steady. A lot of times, though, the people running these programs mean really well but don't have a lot of experience buying food. So they might have be planning the program with a scrappy Excel sheet and might not be super in flow in the way that a normal, more experienced buyer might be. So just be prepared to work with them on improving the process together over time. Now we can move on to the fun part, institutional buyer. So this is the primary type of buyer that we at Supply Change work with to open the door for underserved producers. First one we can go over is hospitals. So with hospitals, there's multiple ways to get in the door. The first way is with patient meals. So if you have visited a family member or you yourself have been in the hospital, you know that they give you that kind of frozen heat and eat thing that is made either by a separate company who is cooking it and bringing it to the hospital, or the hospital might have their own internal operation where they're making those patient meals. This is typically the hardest place to try to get in because, again, they might use some outside company to make those meals for them, or their costs are really tight and they're purchasing from big distributors. They usually have a big contract in place called the GPO, a group purchasing organization. It's basically a way for a hospital to manage their costs. So they will hire a company called Vizient or Avendra or something like that, who then goes out and negotiates their costs for all of their medical supplies, all of their food, all of the kinds of things like that. Those types of arrangements really lock out small and underserved producers. It's really hard to get in. So while we have been able to build some programs that get at patient meals, it's often not the best place to start. A better place to start can be with what we call the retail opportunity at hospitals. So that's the when you go in and you're visiting somebody or you're working at a hospital, the cafeteria there that is available to staff and visitors, that's what's called the retail cafe. So we often find that it's much easier to start here because they're able to be more creative with who they're purchasing from. Other even better opportunities for small producers are that hospitals sometimes have on-site farmers markets, which can be a nice transition if you're already selling at farmers markets. And they often have box programs themselves. Sometimes there's doctors or other staff members that say, hey, we should have like a box program for staff and other visitors to be able to purchase from week over week. So that can be a really nice opportunity we've seen in the past. Next institutional buyer type is schools. So schools are all different sizes and have all different types of opportunities. But the main ones that come up over and over again that we see are that getting into a school typically goes really well if we start with the salad bar. So a lot of schools, it's really hard for them to change the regular hot meal menus that they're selling to students. They have to meet all kinds of federal regulations. They have to make sure they have an orange item and a red item and a green item and a purple item. So adjusting their menus can be really difficult. So the salad bar is a great place to start because it's very easy for them to change out, say, like a tomato they're importing from Mexico. They can switch that over to an heirloom cherry tomato that you are growing quite easily. They often want things like if you're growing jicama, for instance, they'll always want that. They want cucumbers. They want things that are easy to grow in the spring and fall and summer and things like that. Um, a really good way to get in is that schools, like many federally funded types of buyers, have things that are called micro purchase dollars. This is essentially petty cash. There's different limits depending on where you are and what the school board sets the rule at, but they can spend anywhere from $5,000 to $25,000 without having to get permission or write a contract. So it's a way for them to try out new suppliers. So asking a school district if you're trying to work with them and you're in conversation with them, if they have any micro purchase dollars that they can spend on you, that's a good way to start the conversation because then they can just do a few test orders with you. They could spend, a couple $1,000s here or there on getting your products on the salad bar. It's a really good way to open the door. Schools often start seeking local suppliers when they get special grants, like farm to school grants from their state or region. So that can be a good opportunity. If you hear of grant opportunities that have gone out to schools to do farm to school, you can look up who got that grant and reach out to them if they're nearby to you and start asking them this series of questions. Once you get better at selling to schools and you've gotten some micro purchase sales under your belt, it can be good to start a conversation about getting on a contract with them. The best way to do that is through what we call an informal bid. So if you think about it in terms of the seriousness and cost of the way schools buy food, there's micro purchase at one end. That's the small petty cash we've talked about. An informal bid is like the next block of money. If they spend, say, between $25,000 and $80,000 on a supplier, they can put out what's called an informal bid. And that's something that they can write with you in mind so that you can get on a contract with them. The next big chunk of money they spend is what's called a formal bid, and that's like, a couple $100,000 a year that they might spend on one supplier. It doesn't make sense for us to try to pursue one of those because that's usually the contract that goes to their biggest distributor that they work with, who is bringing them in their protein, the vast majority of their produce, etc. So again, focusing on micro purchase dollars and then working your way up to talking with the school about getting on a contract through an informal bid. Challenges here are that we know that if we're a farmer, we're growing the most of our product generally in the summer when school is not in session. So really focusing your conversations on spring and fall. And then again, it's really hard to navigate this whole bid process. Even when a school district is trying to work with you for an informal bid, this is a really heavy paperwork process and it can often require outside help. There are consultants that can help schools write better bids to be more inclusive and inviting to smaller producers. And then there's also business advisors that can help you respond to those bids. So everybody kind of needs a lot of help in that situation because the rules are so difficult to follow. Next institutional buyer type, universities. So some similarities with schools here in that, some of the challenges are the seasonal stuff. There's the fewest amount of students around to eat food during peak growing seasons if we're a grower. But they can often have a lot more creative ways of working with small growers depending on the situation. So, for instance, one of the universities we work with, UC Merced, has been really focusing on hyper-local BIPOC sourcing. They've focused on two dining halls they have, and in one of them, they set up a special organic and local dining station where they make special menus that are meant to feature hyper-local and culturally relevant menus. So that's been a way for them to organize how they bring in local farmers that we've helped connect them with. Um, they also have sometimes opportunities like student markets where students run them and they might be interested in working with local growers, so they might be able to set up a direct welcoming buying relationship with you where they're buying just a couple cases here and there, and they usually pay a pretty fair price. A lot of universities also have what are called basic needs programs that are subsidized so that they can help low-income students with food access on campus. So, for instance, at another university we work with, they have a ramen food truck that is free to basic needs qualified students. So they buy cases of product from local farmers, and then turn them into ramen packs and then also hot ramen that they sell to students there. They often will have other opportunities like veggie boxes that they can provide to students too. So if you are near a university, asking them if they have programs like that can be helpful. Um, for regular old, stuff that's going in the student cafeteria, a lot of universities have been trying to increase their sustainable procurement. Most of them are signed up for a program called ASHE Stars. You don't need to know all the details about that other than schools are trying to increase their ASHE points, and you can get points for ASHE by buying organic and in some cases local, depending on how it's defined. So if you know that a university nearby to you is signed on to this program and is trying to increase their local and sustainable sourcing, you can use that as an angle to start a conversation. Sometimes universities have really strict contracts with corporate distributors like Cisco or US Foods, and that makes it really difficult to get in. So figuring out if there's some kind of contract like that in place can be helpful to understand if it's worth your time to have a conversation. But a lot of universities have more flexibility over how they buy. They might work with a smaller, more regional distributor that you could partner with, or they might already work with a food hub that you are involved with or want to be involved with. And in some cases, they might buy directly from a farm. It's not the most common, but it does happen. So figuring out what kind of distribution opportunities they have is a good way to start the conversation. Final institutional buyer that we often work closely with is corporate dining. So this is anywhere that has an employee cafeteria. So for instance, in New York City, we were just working with a couple of corporate cafeterias like Tiffany and Co., Citibank. These are, big companies where employees are eating lunch there during the day, having lunch prepared for them in a cafeteria. These types of corporate cafeterias often work with what are called food service management companies. So they are hiring companies like Aramark or Sodexo, whose whole business is running cafeterias like this. The trade-off here is that while these types of food service companies typically, historically, have been really difficult for small and underserved producers to work with, increasingly they're seeing they need to make a change and trying to be more local and sustainable. There's also smaller food service companies that are starting to get a little bit more successful. So, for instance, Thomas Cuisine is a newer one that runs cafeterias for employee cafeterias and even for hospitals in a lot of regions. And their whole thing is we source local and sustainable. So it's if you hear about companies like this, like if you see the name Thomas somewhere, go ahead and reach out to them and see if there's opportunities if they are running a cafeteria nearby to you. One difficulty with this is that even if they do want to work with small producers, they might have, and almost often always do, have a contracted distributor they work with. Sometimes it's a regional one that you can get into, and depending on how friendly they are to local suppliers, it might or might not be a good pathway in, but it's helpful to find out who that contracted distributor is. So that was a lot. I know we'll go over a little bit more of that, and I'll hopefully clarify that before we start going into more of understanding your own readiness. But in general, um, it's important to know the distinction between direct versus distributed. So in some of those examples we talked about, there's occasionally a way for you as a producer to sell directly to an institution, but almost always an institution wants to bring in your product through someone who is aggregating for you, who is aggregating from multiple farms. So there's different ways, of course, that food gets aggregated. So the first one that is the most friendly to farmers that I'm sure most of you are familiar with is food hubs, right? So a food hub is just a values-based distributor. They're really interested in supporting small growers, and that is tends to be their entire business model. So they are often able to help you with readiness and provide you with resources to get you ready for the wholesale market. They usually have policies about paying fair prices to growers. They can take smaller amounts, and they can take a lot of the marketing off for you, so you can drop off at just one place and they'll do all the selling for you. However, it's really hard to be a food hub because distributing food costs so much money and has very low profit margins. And food hubs tend to be smaller. It's risky and it's hard. And if they're nonprofit, they might be dependent on grant funding. And one trade-off of them paying fair prices to growers and them being small is that they often have to charge a higher price than their competitors. So it can be harder for them to compete with the larger distributors and brokers. Another type of food hub-like entity is what we call a farmer-led aggregator. This is typically a farm or a group of farmers who realize that they can access more customers if they start aggregating. So it might be a farm that has been really successful selling to multiple school districts. They realize they need more product, so they start bringing in product from other farms and start acting like a food hub. And they tend to be on their way to becoming a more full food hub. However, in that transitional place, they may not have as much infrastructure as a full food hub, right? So they might not have access to a large cooler. They might just have one sprinter van, and they might not have like a full warehouse. And they also might be learning and growing a lot, but it can be a really good thing to be involved with a farmer-led aggregator, so that you can work together, explore the market together, and mature together. It's often easier to get in the door with an aggregator like this too, because they are still learning and growing. Great, so moving up in terms of difficulty and complexity, the next type of aggregator we might see is a broker. So brokers don't have warehouses themselves, right? So they are basically acting as a matchmaker between suppliers and buyers. Because they don't have a warehouse to pay for and they don't have trucks to pay for, they can be more cost competitive. However, that means that they might take a commission from you, usually around 8 to 10% on the sale. So they might charge whoever they're selling it a 10% markup, and then they'll take their other 10% from you, and that's how they make money. However, they can open up a ton of sales for you based on how their business model works. Another going up the chain, the next one is just a regular distributor, right? And there's all different sizes of distributors, as we've been touching on. There can be really small produce only distributors that have, a footprint of about 200, a 200 square mile radius of coverage. And there could be giant mega distributors called broadliners like Cisco, like US Foods, like Gordon Food Service, and anything in between. So the opportunities here are they are high volume, they have big systems of coverage. Generally, even if they're small, they tend to have some pretty rigorous systems in place. They might have been in operation for 50 or 70 years. If they are a strong distributor, they probably have a well-organized warehouse. And similar to a broker, they can open up a lot of sales opportunities for you if the relationship is good. The problem is a lot of them are not historically values driven. They might not have a lot of experience working with small producers, and they have really difficult, in general, onboarding processes. So sometimes if you, for instance, have made a relationship with a school district, the school district wants to work with you and then says, work with my distributor and get onboarded so I can buy your product through them. The distributor is doing it because their customer has asked them to, but they may not have a ton of time or energy to deeply work with you. So it's helpful to stay in close touch, say, with that school district so that they can put pressure on the distributor to do right by you. We see a lot of issues with this exact type of situation in our work very frequently, where the distributor just treats the small producer like any old producer that they might be working with that might be much larger and more corporate. And they'll send you just a giant packet of things without explaining it. They might have some sort of random requirement that actually doesn't matter, but they won't be as flexible with you to work with it. So again, really important to keep in touch with whoever your end customer is, if it's a school district, again, if it's a hospital, whoever it is, so that they can help you work effectively with the distributor. However, we do see some distributors who have really gotten hip to this and have said, we are going to invest in small producers. We see this as good for our business. So we've worked with distributors who have even set up cost share programs and scholarship programs to help local growers get GAP certified. And then we'll go the extra mile to create workaround processes to show chefs, hey, this is the local stuff. Make sure you buy this rather than just the normal stuff on our catalog. So we've seen both. One thing to notice too is that especially if the distributor is not super inclined to be farm friendly, they really won't tolerate a lot of mistakes. So if you miss a delivery or if you haven't done a quality check or had a really clarifying conversation with them about their quality expectations, the relationship can go sour really quickly, and then the distributor might lock you out. So again, communication is all important, which we'll talk about more in a bit. Great. And just to show you visually how this works a bit more, since again, that was a ton of information. This is a situation where maybe we're farm selling to a food hub. The food hub might be approved to sell directly to a school or university. So dropping off at this food hub opens up multiple sales opportunities while it's just one drop off to you. However, a lot of those food service companies I mentioned, such as Aramark or Sodexo or one of their subsidiaries, may or may not have a local food hub as an approved supplier. So even if you are selling to a food hub, you may not be able to have access to every school or university that these types of food service companies sell to. However, there are some situations where you can get around that by working with an approved values-based distributor, as we were just touching on. So in Chicago, Midwest Foods is typically a good way in because Midwest is an approved distributor for Aramark, for Compass Group, for a lot of these food service companies. And as many of you know, they have a really good program for working with local producers and getting them in the door and being a friendly buyer to them. So just wanted to illustrate that a little bit more clearly about where it's possible to get in the door based on, again, what the distributor picture looks like. So again, just to summarize this section, if you're working with an aggregator, they should be doing the buyer relationship work on your behalf. Though if they are kind of dragging their feet and it's because that end buyer, that school district or whoever it is, wants to work with you, you may have to work with the end customer to get that extra push through. So your job in terms of your readiness is to make sure not only that you're having good communication, but that you are ready for the aggregator so that you can put your best foot forward in the market and make sure that you're giving yourself the best opportunity. So moving into this next section, we'll delve a little bit deeply into what that means to be ready for the market. And I just want to highlight, we always say this, assessing your skills and goals without judgment is so important. Everyone is on a learning journey, and it's always good to just recognize where you are and have a mindset of continuous improvement. And that goes for everybody in the system, not just producers. buyers have so much to learn and to continuously improve in order to be ready for you. There's so much that distributors have to do, as we were just saying, to be ready and welcoming for producers. So we are all learning as a movement how to make supply chains better and more inclusive. And so just looking at ourselves with an objective, judgment-free eye is really important. So in general, we know that if we have strong internal operations, that provides a really good foundation for us to be strong in our business and market skills. So if you are paired up with, say, a business advisor or an extension specialist, that can help you with all of the things on the left side of the slide here. So getting strong at bookkeeping and accounting, at making sure we have land tenure and stability, we have access to capital, we have good inventory management of our inputs and our packaging and things like that. And we understand our cost to produce, which another way to say that is COGS, or cost of goods. The indicators for that, for all those things, would be we have consistent financial records written down and organized in a binder or online. We have a stable lease or deed. We know that we're investing in infrastructure like a wash pack station, or a small chop shop on our property in a way that's matching our growth. So we're not biting off more than we can chew with capital investments. We know we have records of purchases and receipts for all the things we've bought, organized and hopefully put into a business budget or an enterprise budget. And we understand how much it costs us to produce whatever we're producing so that we can develop a stronger margin and pricing strategy. We know what we need to sell in order to make enough money to sustain us. And just so you know, we are developing a more intensive training for producers to understand their costs to grow and their margin and pricing strategy. So stay tuned for that to come out probably early next year. So again, all that internal business operations helps us build a foundation so that we can be stronger on business and market readiness. So if we have a good understanding of our cost to grow and understanding our inputs and all of that, we can get a better understanding of what our crop and production planning is and should be in alignment with what we know about what buyers want in the market. We know that we will have availability lists showing what we have for sale, and even better, in addition to a weekly availability list, we might have a seasonal buying guide that shows everything we know we're going to produce in a season so that we can clearly communicate with buyers what we're going to have and when. We know we have organized documents. This is a huge one for us. We see that tons of producers that we work with may not have things easily accessible. So we've gotten them a sale, everything is just about ready to go, but then we can't find the most recent gap audit, or we can't find the product liability insurance. So making sure that we have all those things clearly organized can be a huge game changer, whether it's in Google Drive or even just a photo album on your phone that you can easily text or email to where it's needed to go. We know that we want to have reliable order fulfillment and quality control. We just had a breakdown yesterday with a farmer we're working with who did not write down in his calendar when the first delivery he was supposed to do for a new customer was, so he completely missed it. And now we are troubleshooting and trying to figure out how to repair that relationship. So having a plan for what our delivery days are, when we're supposed to be where, and that we also have a process for quality control is really important. So having a good idea of what kind of quality expectations your buyer has, the ability to take pictures if it's a new relationship just before you're about to deliver something and send it to the buyer can be a great practice. So all these types of things really, really important, especially when a relationship is new. Communication skills, I'll keep hammering on that one, but making sure that we're checking our email once per day and we're responding to phone calls and texts within 8 hours. It's really hard when you're producing something because there's so many things nagging at your attention. But just having just a little bit of a system about when you're checking and when you're responding makes all the difference. Having invoicing and billing proficiency, so being able to use an invoice template, ability to accept a couple forms of payment, whether it's a check and or ACH, so being able to get digital payments can be really helpful. And then having our marketing assets like photos of us on our farm that look nice, having a written biography and a description of your farm and your mission. All those things, again, organized with the rest of your documents and easy to send by email. Really important. So we'll go into all these in a little bit more detail in the following slides. In general, though, this is just some overall overarching advice we give to all the producers we work with. It seems obvious, but producing what your buyers want is the first step we need to take in order to be successful with wholesale sales. So you want to find the right balance between kind of your staple crops that are easier to grow and that might fill out a nice order. So like onions and potatoes and things like that, and carrots. But also finding your niche is really important. So for instance, for a nice array of fall crops, you might want some specialty turnips, some collards, some lettuce mix. Tons of schools love lettuce mix. That's like one of the easiest things to get started with a farm to school situation. Things like sweet peppers, scallion bunches, Napa cabbages, things that are a little bit special, can really help make sure you have a full balanced portfolio of goods to sell. Um, a really good practice to get started with understanding and working towards a margin markup strategy is just choosing a couple of crops and analyzing your cost inputs for each of those things, and then making sure we're marking up 20 to 60% based on that. And again, we're developing a full big training on pricing strategies for producers, that we're going to offer at some point, just because we get asked questions about how much I charge for X, Y, or Z, when we find that that's a very common request. Also understanding, again, the different price points that different wholesale buyers can work with. So a distributor is going to want your lowest price. If you're working directly with a school district, they might be able to sell at a little bit more. If we're working with a restaurant, you can charge a little bit more for that. So just knowing that you can't sell at one flat price to every single wholesale buyer, you might have to have some variability. You want to control that, but just knowing that everyone is going to have a different expectation of you. So be prepared mentally to manage that. And again, communication, understanding, um, even if it takes like just a quick 15-minute conversation once a month with buyers you're working with. Hey, how did that go? How is that going? We find that without any kind of checkpoint, things get missed. So to give you an example, one BIPOC farmer we were working with who was selling to a university. The university just stopped buying about 10 products that he was selling, and we didn't know why. So we set up a check-in, and it turns out that they had been feeling some type of way that those 10 products were just 10% higher than they thought they should be, but the buyer didn't say anything. We went back to the producer. The producer said, "Oh, I just didn't really know what to charge for those, but I can totally afford to reduce the price 10% on five of those things." So we got those five things ordered again. So just getting a little bit of feedback on what they're buying and why, if they have any feelings or hesitations about things, can really clear things up and open up more sales. So here's an example crop plan that we developed for one of our client farms that we have worked with, in order to present, basically just help them organize their minds about when they're transplanting, when they're growing, and then understanding how much of each product they will expect to harvest per month. So this helped us organize ourselves towards sending this out to larger buyers so that the buyers could understand how much would be available so that they could work their menus around it. So again, weekly availability lists. Having a website is optional, but if you do have one, or social media, you can have your farm bio listed there. If you're working mostly with wholesale buyers, it can also, again, be helpful to have all of that organized, like say in a Word document or a Google document that you can easily pull up and send to buyers or paste in an email. It just really saves a ton of time and helps you sell. Product photos again. This is a farm that we work with who sends these photos of his purple and green broccolini before he sells to new buyers so that they can understand that his broccolini looks slightly different than what they might be used to purchasing. So it just really helps ease things so that the buyer is not surprised when the product shows up and can approve it before he gets in the van and starts delivering it. Here's an example of just a template for a weekly availability list. You do not have to overthink this. It can just be, a simple Excel sheet. It can be a Google sheet. But so just having the names of your products, the price per pound or bunch or case, and then a quick snapshot of future availability so they can understand if they can plan to buy that a couple weeks at a time. This is an example of a farm that we work with who puts out a really beautiful seasonal buying guide for their buyers that's easily downloadable by anybody who wants to see it at any time. So they'll list all of the products that they have available here, what the case pack is, what they expect the case price to be, if there's a discounted price, if people buy more than, 5 or 7 or 10 cases at a time, how many cases they expect to have available per week, and then the date range available. So this really helps buyers understand what's going to be available and when. It just really helps save hours and hours of conversation and planning, and it eases their decision making. What's really hard with buyers is that it's really difficult for them to make a decision because they are making so many decisions all at once about everything else they need to buy and do. So the more we can ease their decision-making time and effort, the better. So having these types of things really, really, really helps. Payment and invoicing, we have included an invoice template in the resource packet we're going to provide you at the end here. Digital invoices really help with your own record keeping. If you are working with an accountant or a business advisor and they set you up on QuickBooks, you can easily use something like QuickBooks or a similar program to shoot out an invoice. But in the interim, you can use your own invoicing and at least just keep digital or paper copies of these. One thing to know is that many buyers have different payment types of flows, but on knowing when they are going to pay you and what the agreement is vital for understanding your own cash flow. We've had, farmers that sell to new buyers and that didn't understand it was going to take them 30 days to get paid, and that can be really difficult on cash flow if you haven't planned for that. So understanding what the payment terms are is really helpful, and you can note that on the invoice too, what your preferred ones are if you haven't negotiated it. So here's just a preview of what kinds of workflows can look like as you're transitioning into more wholesale stuff and as you're thinking through how each week will flow. So if you're doing only CSA, you might, do sanitizing, office day, seeding, harvesting. Wednesday might be your CSA pickup day. Then you're doing cultivation and planting, and then Saturday and Sunday you might have off. So that's a pretty normal CSA workflow for a week. For a farmers market, we know we're all building up to the weekend markets. So we take our Monday off, we're sanitizing, we're doing office stuff, we're seeding, then we're planting. Friday, we're harvesting. Saturday, we're market day, or Sunday, we might market day. And then we're taking our days off. If we're starting to mix our markets and we're doing a mix of wholesale and farmers markets, this is what a transitional workflow might look like, right? So Monday we might be sanitizing, doing office things and seeding. Tuesday, maybe we're harvesting for wholesale orders if we've decided that Wednesday is our delivery day. Then Thursday, we're back to cultivation and planting. Friday, we're harvesting for the market, and Saturday, we're farmers market day. So thinking through what you want your delivery day to be is helpful for planning your weekly workflow so that you're not burning out completely. Then if we transition and we decide we want to move into only wholesale, that can eventually open up, of course, multiple delivery days, which a lot of folks do. But again, just thinking through like what you want your ideal weekly workflow to be can help you work backwards from there. Food safety compliance, everybody's favorite topic. So we know that different buyers have different levels of compliance. Everybody who is a larger buyer typically wants you to have GAP. You bare minimum need a written food safety plan. And if you are working with a TA provider, like an extension specialist or a food safety consultant, they can really help you get prepared. So typically the flow is you at least need to take a PSA, a Produce Safety Alliance course at the bare minimum. If you start moving towards GAP, you can usually work with a consultant or some other kind of helper to help you get ready for your audit, which you have to schedule and pay for. That typically takes a couple months to get set up. They'll come out and audit you, and then if you pass, you now are GAP certified. If you don't, they'll give you a list of corrective actions, and then you'll have to reschedule another audit for later. So the whole process can take a long time depending on how difficult it is to get all of your records organized and get those audits scheduled and paid for. A lot of farmers ask, but don't I meet the FSMA exemption? I'm too small. I don't think I should be subject to having third-party gap. And legally, in a lot of cases, that's true. You don't legally have to have gap in order to sell to a larger buyer. However, if you are working with a distributor who requires it no matter what, then that's just what the situation is, which is why we recommend that all the producers we work with start moving towards gap. It really just opens up so many doors. And yes, it's expensive, and yes, it's a huge headache, but it really does open the most doors possible. So our general advice in this case is starting small, just focus on one element at a time, start taking baby steps towards having a strong food safety culture on your farm. It's also just good. We want to keep poop out of food. This is like our responsibility as people growing food, and taking these steps really helps ensure that we are doing the most to do that. So field packing as much as you can, making sure that our tables and storage racks are on wheels in the wash pack area. We do not have any cases on the ground, and the pallets are the ones on the ground, of the cooler cases on those pallets. We did provide a food safety toolkit, and the resources we'll share as well. Insurance. So every food producer in general should have general product liability insurance coverage. It's generally best to have $1 million worth of coverage, and making sure that your COI, your proof of insurance, is up to date. A lot of times it's really easy to forget when things are expiring. So having it on auto renewal can be a really good thing to do. Sometimes larger buyers will ask for $2 billion of insurance, but in most cases, when we are advocating for growers, we just ask them to reduce that to 1 million, and we really haven't had anyone say no to us. So 1 million is generally best practice to have. Um, some buyers, if you are doing the delivery to certain places, might also ask you to have commercial auto liability for your delivery vehicle, or have some other expectations around that. So being clear on what insurance is required from you is another thing to add to conversations you're having with new wholesale buyers. We also, of course, see that being organic certified can really open up a lot of doors, especially if your pricing is a little bit higher than larger competitors. It can help really add to the price of your products in a way that's justifiable. As a heads up, you can't call your products organic if you sell more than $5,000 worth of product in a year and you are not organically certified. It can also be a win-win if you are going down the organic certification path and trying to get GAP certified. A lot of the record keeping practices overlap, so it can again be a win-win to get both. Labeling and traceability is huge, and it can be a bit of a learning curve moving from direct marketing from farmers markets and CSAs to wholesale buyers. There isn't a lot of clarity sometimes from buyers. They kind of might have different expectations of you for what they want you to label on your box. Some brokers that we work with will be very explicit with growers, like, hey, an order's coming in. Can you write with marker a couple of things on the label? But in general, most buyers will want you to have the product name written, how much is in the case, the farm name, the address, the field and row number if you have that, the harvest date, certified organic label if you have it. So being able to know what row numbers are in your field, like having a row numbering system, can help you a lot with this type of labeling, and just puts everybody at ease so that in case there's a food safety issue, you are able to be legally compliant and keep your farm out of trouble. It may be helpful to purchase an on-farm label maker, which some of the producers we work with have done, that you can get away with marker in the meantime in a lot of cases. Just again, conversations with your buyers about what their expectations are. For packaging, we have provided a wholesale packing resource guide in the resource packet, but it's important to have an understanding of and some decision making around what your pack sizes will be if you want to align with sort of industry standard. Like, so if you want to have 24 count kale, if you want to have 24 count bunches of carrots, or if you want to go a little bit rogue and do your own case packs, just have some clarity about why you're making that decision and upfront with your buyers. This is my case pack. and see if it causes any issues if they expect more industry standard type of things. It's also just helpful psychologically because lots of buyers benchmark mentally what they think the price for a case should be. So if you are selling say like a 25-pound case of green beans and they're used to buying a 10-pound case of green beans, your price is obviously going to be higher than a 10-pound case of green beans. I can't tell you how much this has come up over the last couple years because people just they have a price in mind for how much green beans should cost. So just be clear about what your case packs are in case that comes up. Also, if you have multiple deliveries and can choose your delivery day, again, go back and think through what you want your weekly workflow to be and understand why you're making a decision about why one day of the week is your delivery day over another. Try to align your deliveries as much as possible. Deliveries are a very fast way to not only burn out your mental and physical energy, but also it bleeds out your margin. So there's a link here to a delivery cost calculator that you can work with. When you click this link, it'll automatically create your own copy in Google Drive. And you can enter in the cost of gas. You can enter in the cost of other overhead things. And then you can use that to plan out how much you should be charging for deliveries, if you need to charge a delivery fee, and then also perhaps what your delivery minimum should be. We just ran through this exercise with a small food hub that we work with and found that he was almost losing money on a lot of his deliveries, even though he was only driving 40 miles in each direction. He had $100 delivery minimum, and that wasn't quite enough to make it worth the cost of that thing. So helpful to understand every time you get in the van and drive or send someone else in the van to drive, there's a risk of like driving away your margin and your profit. Oops, this is a repeat, excuse me. And then we're throwing a lot at you in terms of, like all kinds of things to do and work on to be wholesale ready. So one mental exercise we recommend is doing just a quick thing in your notebook that we call impact and effort mapping. So at the top end here, we can see it's a high effort versus low effort, and left and right is low impact versus high impact. So mapping out like how difficult and how impactful different things you can do on your to-do list will be. So for instance, we know that GAP certification is going to be very high effort, right? It's expensive, it's hard, it's time consuming, there's a lot of paperwork involved, but we also know it's high impact. So we want to make sure that we are keeping this somewhere in our roadmap for the next, say 6 months. We know we want to focus on it, but it might not be the very first thing we do. We might need to break this down into smaller steps and see when we do them. Then you can look down here and map out things that are lower effort but high impact. So organizing documents, we know that this is going to make a huge impact. It saves hours and hours and hours of communication. It makes us look professional. It helps us be successful. And you can be done in one day where you sit down at your computer, you get copies of all of your, say, organic certification, your food safety certification, your insurance document and proof, your farm bio and your farm photos. Put it all in different types of folders in Google Drive. That can be done in like 2 hours. And then we've done something really high impact. So doing this type of exercise can help us prioritize what our actions should be so that we're not overwhelming ourselves or just getting stuck and not taking steps towards being wholesale ready. All right, for this final section, we're going to zoom out a little bit and think through farmer archetypes. So a lot of the things that we have talked about doing in this training have been about moving towards being a wholesale type of producer. But it's helpful to take a step back and be like, wait a minute, what kind of producer am I in the first place? Should I be moving there just because I think there's money there? Or is it core to my identity as a producer and kind of where I want to be going? So that's what this next section is really about. So the first type of producer that we think about, there's 3 in general. So the first one that we work with is what we call a sovereignty producer. Key characteristics of this type of producer are They are focused typically on community and cultural goals. They tend to prioritize direct markets like farmers markets and U-Picks, veggie box distributions, things like that. They tend to be smaller scale, though not always, growing a ton of different crops or products. And they're typically in or close to a city. Major strengths, strong community ties, usually are really serving a particular community with culturally significant products. Box programs tend to be where they really shine. The challenge is, of course, that they tend to be limited in terms of capacity for larger scale orders. So if somebody sent them an order for a pallet of this or that, that would be really difficult for them to fulfill. They may not have pallets. They may not have enough cardboard on hand. They may not have the staff capacity to put together that type of order. Pricing is often really difficult to work in a larger buyers too, because they have a lot of diversity on their farm. If they're growing produce, that means that that price point has to be higher. The less complex our operation is, the more we can streamline pricing, the more complex and more things we're growing, the more we've increased our costs of inputs and management. So we have to charge more. So that can make it really difficult to be cost competitive. There's also, because there's very few certifications required for direct marketing or for box programs, it's a huge jump to try to get all those certifications and paperwork things needed and ready in order to be compliant and ready for larger wholesale buyers. And particularly if we're a BIPOC producer, there's a high risk of harm when exposing them to a wholesale system that is not always friendly and can be really harsh. So making sure that we're operating with care when we're working with this type of producer, or if we are this type of producer, taking care of yourself is really important, because the wholesale world can be quite impersonal when it comes to certain distributors or buyers. Um, Next type of farmer archetype that we work with quite a bit, we call mixed market farmers. So these are ones that are really straddling the line between direct markets and wholesale markets. So they might still be doing a couple of farmers market stands, and they are maybe selling to a school district or one corporate cafeteria and are really starting to branch out in that area. So they're typically doing a couple things at once, right? They are scaling and streamlining. So they're trying to get bigger, maybe they're trying to acquire more land or grow more higher volumes in order to really capture the benefits of wholesale sales. And they're trying to become less complex so that they can manage that. So they might go from growing like 30 different things to growing just 6 or 7 different things. But so they've got a lot of crop diversity. They're trying to figure out how to manage that diversity. They're really eager and hungry, typically, to learn and grow their skills and grow their wholesale presence. But because of all those learning curves that they're tackling all at once, they probably need a lot of assistance with compliance, and especially on developing those business and marketing and communication skills. If you remember that table that we showed earlier, it's so much to learn all at once. And it's very normal and human to make a lot of mistakes in this area. However, that means that there's a high risk of burning bridges if, for instance, this type of farmer is put forward for a big pilot with, say, like a corporate cafeteria, everyone's excited about it, but then they just get overwhelmed. Like maybe they had a staffing problem at a farmer's market, an emergency they needed to tend to, and then they missed the delivery. That's happened with farmers we're working with of this type multiple times. So there's just a lot of risks involved. So making sure that we're moving slowly, carefully, getting a lot of support to get a lot of the compliance needs of this type of producer needs met. And then the third type is what we call a commercial producer. So these are producers that are not doing any direct marketing at all. They've transitioned or even started out fully as a wholesale only producer. So they tend to have a high level of readiness. They probably have their gap sorted out. They probably have their insurance up to date. They have a streamlined crop plan. So this grower picture, this is Adelio Coronel that we work with. He doesn't have a ton of acreage. He's just got 6 acres, but he really specializes in broccolini, a couple kinds. So that's kind of, he's able to really streamline and focus his inputs and his management of just a few crops. However, the big risk with this type of producer is that they might have all their eggs in one basket. They might only be dependent on just 1 or 2 buyers, which puts them at risk in case something goes wrong with one of those buyers. So for instance, one of Adelio's main buyers got acquired by a larger corporation, started changing the way that they did pricing, started charging a higher commission. So the main thing with this type of producer is they need to grow their stable of buyers and really make sure that they're having, at least four or five so that they can spread their risk around. They also really need support finding their niche. So Avelio, as we mentioned, has found his niche in terms of broccolini and really becoming an expert at growing that. Others, it can be really hard if you're trying to compete with a bunch of people selling the same things. If you're just growing, say, kale and carrots, it's a difficult market out there. There's a zillion other people growing those things. So really finding out what you're strong at and special at is key to being successful as a commercial grower, since you're growing fewer things than another type. So just to illustrate this a bit further about different types of farmer archetypes, all the different readiness factors that we've covered, and how we actually put them together with buyers. So weaving this all together, if we have a farm and a hospital, we know that there's multiple ways to get in the door of a hospital. We know there's multiple types of farmers. So looking at it this way, we can see that a sovereignty farm is probably going to be the best fit for a hospital food as medicine box program, right? Whereas a mixed market farm might do better selling to a food hub that can be a collaborative partner, help them with farm readiness, and then manage the marketing of the product for them to a hospital retail pilot, which is managed by a food service management company. So the food hub can deal with all of that. And because it's a hospital retail pilot, they're going to be more inviting to food hubs. And so it's an easier path for a mixed market farm to get in the door so that they can see their product sold in a hospital cafeteria. And then remember, we talked about how patient meals are some of the hardest ones to get into. So that might be a better fit for a commercial farm who is selling to a broker so that both of them are experienced working together. The broker can then sell their product to a distributor who is selling it to whoever company is making the patient meals. So you can kind of see how this all fits together in terms of knowing our archetype as a producer and then knowing which door we should walk through in order to get more wholesale sales as we kind of move around the different types. Great, and that will bring me to the end. I'm a couple minutes ahead, but we have plenty of time for questions and comments. And then again, if I think Alex is going to share um, the link to this presentation in the chat so that you can easily click on this free resource packet and download it. And then there's some other links in the previous slides, including to the YouTube video for the training last year, and then the delivery calculator that you can make a copy of for your own records. With that, we'll open it up.
Thank you, H, for this wonderful presentation. One of the questions that was in the chat that came up earlier is from Katie. The question is, are there food safety concerns with lettuce greens? It seems like a higher risk crop to sell to schools.
Yes, so in some states like California, there's things like the leafy greens marketing agreement that can come into play at times. But we have seen even in California where there is more scrutiny, food hubs and smaller growers still having success with things like lettuce mix. We also are working on a project in West Virginia where lettuce mix has been a really successful product from local growers. So the most important thing is to ensure that you have wash pack procedures set up on your farm and that you're documenting what those wash pack procedures are, especially if you're selling to a sensitive population like kids in a school or healthcare. So we definitely have seen it successful and it is a higher risk product. So making sure that you do have good procedures for that documented and expectations clear with the buyers is vital.
The next question we have from Michaela is, what do food safety requirements typically look like for schools? I don't know, to add more to that, if it varies from charter to public to private, and if you can provide some color there.
Yes, it tends to vary pretty widely. And interestingly, there are many school districts who are less strict than you would think they would be. So we have seen some producers in our network who are not GAP certified, able to sell to a school district as long as they have some kind of food safety plan in place. However, I would say it's about 50-50. So there are a lot of school districts that do require GAP. The best way to find out about that is simply by asking them. And sometimes if you are in a micro purchase relationship, as we described earlier, where schools might be using that petty cash to try your stuff out on the salad bar or some other way. You might be able to get away without having gap there. But when you're on an informal bid, they might ask you to get gap certified then. So again, it's a conversation you should have, but I would say it's about 50-50 in terms of schools requiring it or not.
Our next question comes from Natasha. I'm wondering, do you have recommendations for consultants who can work with farmers and schools on informal bid writing?
Yes. So the number one consultant we recommend for that is Shared Plate Strategies. They have worked with pretty much every major school district in California on that and have just announced that they are now available to work on that nationwide. So Shared Plate Strategies is the ultimate experts on how to help schools write farm to school friendly bids.
These questions are firing off. Jack asks, on small scale farms with limited space, is it appropriate to charge wholesale buyers, like restaurants, for the bed space being used to grow their niche crops, or are they normally just charged for the product itself?
Normally just charge for the product itself. I would say if you are growing something specially for a chef, they tend to be pretty forgiving on what the prices should be, especially if it's a short shelf life product. So if it's something like shiso or herbs or something like that, the chef knows that they and is typically willing to pay a high price because that is a very risky product to grow. So I would say don't ever charge any buyer a separate line item for things like bed space, but understand what your cost is to grow and then build that into the ultimate price. There are tools like Know Your Cost to Grow and Produce Compass that can help you understand what exactly your cost to grow is. We really recommend working with a business advisor or trying one of those two on your own. It's really time consuming, but then it can really help you understand what you need to charge to ensure that it's profitable. In general, I would say the shorter the shelf life, the more you can get away with charging. The longer the shelf life, the more you should keep your margin quite small.
Our next question comes from Pete. What are some of the ways wholesale buyers recognize the value of locally produced products in their operation? Can a food buyer recognizing value lead to better prices for producers?
Yeah, in ideally it should. The way you can understand wholesale buyers is like anybody else, think of it on a bell curve, right? So at one end, you have folks that are just like, I don't care about local food or values at all. I only want the cheapest and easiest. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have people who are just champions and really passionate and will figure out how to celebrate it, how to pay the most fair price for it, and will be leaders in local sourcing for their community. And each of those is kind of small, right? What you have mostly is people in the middle who want to do the right thing. They are well-intentioned, they have good hearts, but they either don't know how to do local sourcing well or are kind of afraid. They want to see what other people are doing. They need that social proof of the champions in order to make the next step. So a lot of times it's a growth process in order to get people sort of in the middle there to start becoming champions. So you want to find, if possible, who those champions are, see if it's possible to work with them. And then if you're working with somebody more in the middle of the bell curve, you know that they might have some understanding that they should pay more, and it's helpful to know how much more. I would say champions know that they need to pay like 30% more on average for premium, local, values-based product. People in the middle, they tend to want to pay, more like 0% to 10% more, maybe 15%. So understanding where someone is coming kind of on a spiritual level with this work, and then what their tolerance is, not only for price, but for the extra complexity of working with special local producers. Because it is hard, it's a different way of working. It's not just hitting a button from their distributor's order guide. It's having a relationship, it's doing planning, it's doing things differently. We're asking people to change in order to work with us. So you're asking someone to pay not only more, but actually do their jobs differently. So having a lot of patience and perseverance is really key there.